Well, thanks for joining me this morning. And I'm going to try not to gloat too much because this was my year. I'm a winner. My team is on top, and I'm definitely not talking about the election. I'm talking about last week when 22 years after Kirk Gibson hit the shot heard round the world, my Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series. This is a big deal in my family. Most of the grown-up fights amongst my siblings are about who's going to inherit Sandy Koufax's undershirt. If you don't know, he's a famous Dodger pitcher, and my dad inherited or got or took his undershirt when he was a ball boy in the 60s at Dodger Stadium. There's a lot of arguing about who's going to inherit this shirt. If we don't figure it out, my dad may have to donate it to science. But the point of all of this is it was our year after waiting a long time to see our team go all the way. And we love feeling like winners. We don't love the feeling of defeat, like when the Astros steal the series by sign stealing. And I'm wondering how all of us are feeling this weekend after the election. I'm not, of course, asking for a public response, but I know elections are emotional times. Some of us might be feeling a sense of disappointment or loss. Others might be rejoicing. Others might feel concerned or skeptical about the future. There's a lot of emotions right now. And this week, we're starting a new sermon series called What I Wish My Friends Knew About Jesus. I want my friends who haven't started a relationship with Jesus yet to know that Jesus is a healer. This reminded me of my friend Lupe. We met because our kids were in school together. And she thought she knew some things about Jesus. She'd grown up in a very religious church, and she knew she wasn't accepted there because her boyfriend had an earring and they had a baby, and she'd broken the rules and she didn't feel accepted when she went to church. But she took a big risk and came to an Easter service with me. And there she met Jesus in a way that she hadn't before. And she discovered that Jesus wanted to restore her life and restore her heart and her family. And that was the beginning of a big adventure for her of following Jesus the healer. She didn't need a lecture on sin. She needed to meet Jesus the healer. But I'm afraid sometimes that as believers, our passionate rhetoric, and we're right to be passionate, but we get so passionate about what we're against and so loud that I think sometimes people can't hear what Christians are for. I'm afraid that those outside the church may be seeing more condemnation than they see grace, more desire for power than desire to serve. But you and I know that consolidating power, condemning others, proving we're right, that's not the way of Jesus. If you know Jesus, you know that Jesus is a healer, and we need a healer. This has been one of the most divisive elections in recent history. I don't think we can blame all of that on the candidates because surveys show that trust among Americans has been in a free fall from the 1990s to 2020. Our trust in institutions even like the church, is at an all-time low, and even our trust in each other. We see an example of this in the platform that moved President Trump to power in 2016. There were lots of people that felt that they'd been betrayed by career politicians, that their jobs had been shipped overseas, and they wanted a change. They wanted an outsider. They didn't trust the government. They'd been condescended to by snobby professional politicians. And this year, we saw the broken trust of the African American community make the headlines for months. The big story is that all over our country, people are struggling to trust the government, to trust institutions. Americans are even losing trust in each other. And it sounds a whole lot like the environment that we find in Luke 4. I'm going to start reading in verse 16 about Jesus speaking to an audience in his hometown. Jesus went to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." And in verse 24, "Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." And all the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up and drove him out of town and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked through the cloud and went on his way. Like the United States today, the atmosphere in Nazareth was a pervasive lack of trust. First of all, they were under Roman occupation. They were in their homeland, but it was like they were in exile because they had no power. The purpose of the Romans and the colonies was to extract the maximum amount of taxes and grain from colonies like Galilee, where Nazareth was located, and Judea, where Jerusalem was located nearby. And they wanted to deliver bread to Rome. Caesar bought favor from his people by delivering bread from the colonies. God's people were in their homeland, but they were under an oppressive rule, captives to a brutal power. And so they distrusted their government. But they also distrusted their own Jewish leaders. Corruption was rampant in the dominant religious institution of the day. The temple was intended to be a visible sign of God's presence on earth, but to regular Galileans, people from Nazareth, it had become a symbol of wealthy and snobby religious leaders who collaborated with Rome and got rich doing it and used the institutional religion of their people to extort wealth and to keep other Jewish people in bondage. So they distrusted their religious leaders. They also distrusted promises of a better future. The memory of defeat was recent and raw because just a few miles from Nazareth in Sepphoris, a few years before, in AD 6, Galileans had rallied around a leader who said he was going to throw off Roman oppression. And Roman response was swift and brutal. They wiped out the whole town, including all the innocents. It was destroyed. Everyone was killed. And so people in Galilee were very careful about talk of revolution, about talk of messiahs. They were skeptical of messianic pretenders. They distrusted promises for the future because they knew that hope could be deadly. There were several political parties: the Zealots, who were like terrorists, Essenes, who were mystics, the Pharisees, who wanted to just do everything right, and the Sadducees, who collaborated with Rome. And Jesus didn't align himself with any of these different political parties. None of these visions really answered how God would set things right in the world. Jesus spoke up that day in Nazareth to say what he was not and what he was as he stepped forward as healer and hope of the world. And my friends need to know what Jesus is not. People still have a lot of crazy ideas about Jesus. And so Luke makes clear from the beginning whom Jesus is not. Right before this passage, earlier in Luke 4, he gives us the story that's really important to the background. He gives us the story that tells us what kind of Messiah Jesus is refusing to be. Satan tempts Jesus while he's fasting in the wilderness with 3 options for his future. Jesus is absolutely clear on who he is and who he's not. He's not the happiness Messiah. Satan tempted Jesus to turn stones into bread. Just like Caesar, if Jesus could guarantee bread to masses of people, he would be very popular. It would be a guarantee of a rise to power and popularity in Galilee and in Judea. It was the recipe that Caesar used. He bought the support of peasant Romans with the promise of bread. But Jesus refuses to buy people's loyalty with instant gratification. He refused to be a bread Messiah. Today, many of us still would like Jesus sometimes to be a vending machine, give us instant gratification, make us happy, do what we want. But Jesus doesn't just give us what we want in order to buy our vote. He refuses to buy followers with the promise of a pain-free life. Jesus also is not a nationalistic Messiah. He refuses to be the militaristic Messiah that many expected. Satan tempts him to seize power by force and avoid suffering. He says, I'll give you power over the kingdoms of this world. Use the same methods that others use to dominate and rise to power, and you won't have to suffer. You won't have to serve. You won't have to change the world with love and sacrifice. You could fight violence with violence. Israel can dominate other nations the way that they were dominated. And when you're oppressed, that is a pretty tempting option. Fighting back makes sense. But Jesus refuses this quick path to power. His will be the way of suffering and love that subverts the whole power structure of our planet. He doesn't bring his kingdom through military power or political dominance. He is not a nationalistic Messiah. He's also not the marketing Messiah. Satan tempts Jesus to throw himself off the temple. And the point is that God will save him in front of everyone. And it'll be a major marketing stunt. Everyone will love him. It'll be entertaining, and it'll prove who he is, and he'll have a great following. The world will be entertained and impressed. But he refuses to offer the show of a public miracle to entertain, to win followers, to advance his agenda. His miracles were always focused on the needs of people, not building a brand or building a following. In our day, business advisors would be frustrated by his refusal to have a decent social media presence or make his brand visible on a national stage. Jesus refuses to influence the world through a marketing campaign. He's not the marketing Messiah. My friends need to know that Jesus is none of those things, and they need to know that Jesus has a vision for grace in the neighborhood. So on this fateful day, Jesus goes to the synagogue where rabbis taught him to read Hebrew as a child, where he worshiped with his family, his aunts, his uncles, and cousins. His preaching and his miracles had gathered a following in Capernaum, which was fairly close to Nazareth, and everyone was excited that the hometown boy that made good was going to speak. The synagogue was packed. Anticipation was in the air. It was like when Jacob Eason, who played Pop Warner football with my best friend's kids in Lake Stevens, got drafted to the NFL. Today he is a quarterback for the Colts. And we felt like somehow that made us rise up, that our town made national news. This is our guy. This is our time. And Jesus deliberately chooses Isaiah 61. He gets to choose what he reads. He chooses where he starts, and he chooses where he leaves off, which ends up being very significant. He leaves off reading in the middle of a sentence. He's kind of declaring a platform, if you will. He's saying what kind of Messiah he will be. And it's shocking to everyone. It disappoints most people. So let's look at what Jesus has to say. He offers a vision for the future. The Jewish audience knew Jesus was describing the age of the Messiah. After the Messiah defeated those Roman oppressors, lots of good things were expected to happen, and that's what Jesus is reading about. They won't be poor, oppressed, imprisoned, or enslaved. And people who were in this room, they longed for God to move. They were longing for something to change, for this kind of breakthrough. So Jesus stands up to read, and then he sits down to teach, and it says all eyes were on him. You could hear a pin drop. They were waiting for him to say, to call them to arms, to reveal his strategy. How are we going to overthrow Rome? Today it's Nazareth, tomorrow it's Jerusalem, and then Rome. This guy's taking us to the top. What caused them to reject Jesus' message a few minutes later? Well, first of all, Jesus says the time for forgiveness is today. Why did the audience turn on him? It starts with that key word, today. Suddenly they moved from being excited to disappointed. You see, as Jesus read Isaiah 61, he stopped mid-sentence and he left out what might be their favorite part. He left out a line that said that Messiah will bring the vengeance of God on his enemies. And they were waiting for the vengeance of God on the bad guys. Jesus is talking about forgiveness, and he has not yet overthrown the Romans or the corrupt collaborators. He's got the audacity to offer forgiveness and grace from God to everyone right here and right now, and it looks like he forgot to punish the offenders. And gosh darn it, we like winners and losers. Jesus is pushing the envelope. He's offering grace before he deals with the bad guys. We all have certain kinds of people that kind of push our buttons. You know what I mean? You are acting like you're really holy, but the truth is there are people that really push your buttons. And Jesus offends his audience by specifically naming a couple people who are probably on their list and talking about how God offers them grace. He specifically mentions this widow from Sidon. We would call her today a Palestinian widow. He mentions Naaman, the Syrian. He's a Syrian army general. Think about it, a Palestinian widow, a Syrian army general. Even in our day and age, those are not popular people, especially with that kind of a Jewish audience. They don't seem like the good guys, the people that God should be on their side. Can you imagine if Jesus was naming the exact person, the exact neighbor that drives you crazy as the target of his grace? Might make you a little bit uncomfortable. And Jesus does this to make a point. God's grace pushes boundaries, and it pushes them right here and right now. And it's impossible to receive God's forgiveness for myself and put up a fence that says it can't extend to others. Jesus offers real and costly transformation. He offers personal, local, disconcerting revolution that costs me a lot. I have to change. I want a big, decisive national change. It's top down. I don't have to do very much, but somebody out there makes things right, makes things better for me. I want righteousness and justice where bad people are punished and good people are rewarded. But it's much more uncomfortable when God shows up in my neighborhood and he exposes the lies that keep me captive. And he challenges the way that we treat our neighbors. He overthrows our traditional way of looking out for our own tribe. He invites us to love expensively and expansively. And we just want him to deal with the bad guys. But my friends need to know who Jesus is. They need to know that Jesus is also a healer of bodies, communities, and the world. The Isaiah 61 reference that Jesus so specifically chose, it's describing the practice of the year of Jubilee. When he says the year of the Lord. This was a celebration set to happen every 50th year. As described in the Old Testament, debts are forgiven. And because debts are forgiven, indentured servants and slaves were freed. They were slaves because they owed. People returned to their ancestral lands and their property was restored to them. They might have lost it due to bad credit, bad crops, other economic crises. And even the environment got healed in the year of Jubilee. The people and the land, they all got to enjoy a rest from work and production. They got to be restored to fruitfulness. Now, I know that we would never all agree on any specific plan to set so many things right. But can we all agree that we would love to see all forms of corruption and injustice exposed? We would love to see our people, our economy, and even our environment thriving. I think that's something we can agree on. And that's what the gospel's about. We so often cheapen it and think it's just about me and a ticket to heaven and my sins being forgiven. And it includes that. But the mission of Jesus, Jesus the healer, is not just to get people saved. It's to restore lives, communities, relationships between people, relationships between groups of people, and ultimately even our planet. The mission of Jesus is full restoration, and I want my friends to know that. Jesus proclaims a different kind of revolution, People long for healing. We still too often put our hope in political parties or someone that promises to make things right from the top down. Jesus purposely didn't align himself with the political parties of his day. He shocked and disappointed everyone by saying the transformation that you're looking for is right here. And it's got to start with you. Changing the world starts with changing my heart. It starts with recognizing what God is up to in my neighborhood, right in front of me, and joining him, saying yes to him. What's he up to? Well, Jesus proclaims good news to the poor. He invites his people to turn their personal economies upside down. The early church was known for the fact that they cared for each other's needs with incredible sacrifice. No one went hungry. People sold property to meet the needs of others. And they didn't need Rome or any other political power to take care of the poor because they did it voluntarily. As the hands and feet of Jesus, they transformed the economy, starting with them, not waiting for someone to change it from the top down. I love watching people from our church dedicate their time and effort to making sure hungry people are fed in our community. J.D. Heisey could be just sitting back, putting his feet up and enjoying retirement, but instead he helps run the Battleground Food Bank with much of his time, and he has nothing personal to gain. That's the way we transform the economy, starting with us. Jesus set the oppressed free. We offer the Mending the Soul class in our church, and a friend who was part of one of our Mending the Soul groups said, I'm here. Despite what I experienced in church in the past, I'm here because trauma therapy without God could only take me so far. I didn't know how to forgive without God. I didn't know how to heal without God. I'm not sure what to do with him, and I'm not sure what to do without him. I'm telling you, we have a world starving for forgiveness on a personal level and a society level, and it's found in the good news that Jesus brings. There's no other way to be set free than to experience and share the forgiveness of God. Finally, Jesus offered recovery of sight to the blind. Isaiah makes it clear that the people that he's talking about are blind because they are prisoners in a dark dungeon. Bondage keeps people blind. I think we're all aware that slavery was a huge issue in the ancient world, and it's easy to think that we don't have slavery today. Some of you are active in opposing human trafficking, and that is such an important cause. I also want to point out we have some more subtle forms of slavery. Some of you might have watched the current Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma. If you haven't, I'll give you a synopsis that's hopefully not a spoiler. The internet and social media promised us freedom, connection, and prosperity. And it's brought some good things to the world, but unfortunately, it's been corrupted. I think they were grasping for words for how it's been corrupted, and I see forces of evil at work. Something bigger than people. There's greedy special interests, there's corporations, there's shadow operators who buy and sell human futures, human preferences, and their job is to keep people more and more entangled with their technology. I would add something that's not in the documentary, that sex for sale also entraps and enslaves millions of people online. Money, sex, and power. It's been the same throughout the ages. And the documentary offered very little hope that we'll break free from this old bondage to new technology. But the story was the same in the ancient world. Jesus came to people in bondage to sin and to Satan. And because of that, they were blind. And I believe in 2020, with all our technology and information and power, it's still only the good news that Jesus brings: forgiveness and liberation from oppression. Jesus sets people free. Unfortunately, I think many pre-Christians don't think the good news about Jesus is very good. I want my friends to know that the good news about Jesus isn't about consolidating power for Christians or boosting Jesus' popularity or name recognition. He doesn't need that. The good news is that Jesus is a healer and a restorer of bodies and souls. He's a healer of communities and the relationships between people and the brokenness between families and groups of people. He's a healer of societies and systems and even our planet. And Jesus invites you and me to use all our power to love and serve those around us. He transforms our personal economy from one of greed to generosity. He transforms our hearts by giving us forgiveness so freely and pushing boundaries to include the most unlikely people, the neighbors that we would rather not know. He still offers freedom from addictions and entanglements and invites us to speak up for those misused and abused all around us. When Jesus is present in my neighborhood, when Jesus is present in Battleground, everything will change from the inside out. David Brooks is a commentator, and he wrote an article this month about the pervasive lack of trust in America, and he ends it on this hopeful note. Trust can be rebuilt through the accumulation of small heroic acts, the outrageous gesture of extending vulnerability in a world that is mean, by proffering faith in other people when that faith may not be returned. It ripples across society as multiplying moments of beauty in a storm. Trust starts right in the neighborhood. Trust starts with you and me. And I believe in the wake of this ugly and difficult election season, Jesus' mission is still the hope of the world. And rebuilding trust starts right here, right now, in our neighborhood, in our church, as we listen, we love, we extend forgiveness. And now more than ever, I need to know, and my friends need to know, that Jesus is a healer. Let's pray. God, thank you for this morning and this time together. Thank you that Jesus and his good news are still the only thing that brings forgiveness, that sets us free. Lord, I pray that you'd open our eyes to see those around us who need to know that Jesus is a healer, and you'd put our eyes on you so we can carry your mission and your message with us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.